From pursuing a degree to pursuing a degree of nuance in every conversation. From acing a course to raising the discourse. From chatting with roommates in the dorms to creating room for different viewpoints. From participating to fully participating. The Stavros Niarchos Foundation presents The Role of Universities in Modern Democracy, a virtual, open discussion on universities' role in promoting and safeguarding democratic values.
Hi everyone, and welcome to the SNF Dialogues discussion, to the SNF Dialogues webcast, actually, this time with a thematic about the very crucial role of universities, the role of universities in modern democracy. I am Anna Kynthia Bousdoukou, Executive Director of the Stavros Niarchos Foundation Dialogues Initiative, co-founder and Managing Director of IMED and journalist. And as you know, SNF Dialogues is an initiative of the Stavros Niarchos Foundation that through live debates and discussions, but also through multimedia content, aims to promote public dialogue. Today's discussion is part of a series of open discussions we've been holding in the last months on civics in the US. And as you already know, SNF Dialogues are also held through the journalism nonprofit IMED, that stands for Incubator for Media Education and Development. Given our relationship with the SNF Agora Institute, as many of you might know, this discussion today was originally planned to take place at the Johns Hopkins University campus. The SNF Agora Institute, established back in 2018 to explore solutions to counteract the growing polarization in the US and democracies worldwide. But finally, due to logistical challenges, but also the desire to make the event more accessible to students and professors globally, not just in the US, we decided to shift it to a webcast. However, even though we changed format, we have the honor to have with us today the president of Johns Hopkins University, Ron Daniels, who offered to share a few words in the beginning of this discussion. So, President Daniels, thank you for being with us today. And we know that our topic is close to your heart and your field of expertise. We were planning to have also you with us, but here we are virtually. And again, we welcome you. And getting directly to the point, what are your thoughts about the role of universities in modern democracy?
Well, thank you so much. Good evening, all, and thank you, Anna Kynthia, and the Stavros Niarchos Foundation for hosting this vital dialogue on the role of universities in strengthening and sustaining democracy. We all know that democratic societies and the institutions that support their flourishing are facing enduring headwinds. Surging polarization, coarsening civil discourse are the norm, driving many into silos that leave us less inclined to engage in productive, thoughtful, open dialogue with those from different backgrounds, and ever-widening rifts in our wake. At Johns Hopkins and at universities like those represented on this call today, we know the indispensable role institutions like ours can play, and I would argue the obligation that we have to play a role in maintaining healthy democratic societies. This is in no small part because of our educational service and research mission is grounded in and bolstered by the values that undergird our democracies, a premium on freedom of expression and thought, on tolerance for dissent, and the free flow of information and ideas, and in the quest for equal opportunity in a pluralistic society. As part of our obligation, we must equip students, staff, faculty, and all in our communities with the skills and capacities to engage across lines of difference, especially on those issues around which people hold starkly divergent views. After all, each of us will inevitably encounter individuals holding perspectives and ideas that we disagree with, perhaps vehemently so, but the challenge is to truly listen, treating them as fellow travelers worthy of respect, to remain open to their arguments, and to use that understanding to refine, reimagine, or even reject our own long held convictions to arrive at better and better ideas. This is hard work. I know that, especially with the rifts that have arisen among us and in this moment of deepening democratic uncertainty. But I'm grateful that you all, including our student and faculty dialoguers engaging in this discussion tonight, are taking up this charge, not just here, but on your campuses and in your broader communities. It will take all of us living in our democracies around the world to take up the project of repair and ensure the continuing flourishing of the democracies of which we are part. I look forward to hearing the ideas you all raise this evening and continuing to work together to leverage the role of the university to restore vibrant civil discourse that has been at the heart of the democratic experiment from the time of the ancient agoras in Athens. And with that, I'll turn it back to Anna Kynthia to lead tonight's dialogue.
Thank you very much, President Daniels. It's always nice to hear from all of you actors in the field, and there is a lot of discussion regarding the lack of communication and discussion between university students and faculty, and I'm not referring to a specific university. So tonight we're going to have with us academics, but also university students, and at least from my side, I'm looking forward having all of them together into a discussion. So we do really look forward. Again, many thanks. And before we start our discussion with our exceptional panel, I would like to share with you a quote from the article of Jonathan Pinky, who is an assistant professor of political science at the University of Texas. And you can also have a look of the whole article he signs on our webcast, snfdialogues.org, where he says, among others, that global decline in democracy presents a threat to institutions of higher education. Yet the unique social position of higher education also makes such institutions well suited to help repair and reverse democratic backsliding. It is true, universities not only can be the product, but also the guardians of democracy, both at the same time. Think about it. From their very inception, universities are the head of academic knowledge and research, yes, of course, and the driving force behind helping societies evolve. Often they have also been arenas for the fight for democracy and free speech. We at SNF Dialogues believe that universities should be encouraged to serve the public good, especially in the modern era, and especially in our world, the world of polarization, misinformation, and hate speech. And this also reflects to the SNF initiatives at the university level overall for civic education programming. I already mentioned to you the grantee partner SNF Agora Institute at Johns Hopkins University. Additionally, SNF Pedia program at the University of Pennsylvania and SNF Ithaca initiative at the University of Delaware aim to reach young people with opportunities to engage in dialogue across differences, consider the obligation we own each other as citizens, and exercise their democratic muscles all before embarking on their professional journeys. We at the Stavros Niarchos Foundation are very proud to support their work, which, more broadly speaking, is built upon the belief that civics should be baked into our education system at every level in order to build healthier, stronger, and more engaged communities. But getting directly to our guest speakers today, I would like to welcome all of them. Irene Melvey, welcome, Professor Emerita of Mathematics at the Fairfield University and the immediate past president of the American Association of University Professors. John Tomasi, welcome, president of Heterodox Academy and until recently a professor of natural theology at Brown University. John Holmwood, welcome, and many thanks because you are joining us from UK, Emeritus Professor of Sociology University at the University of Nottingham in the UK, and Harry Han. Hi, Harry. and a regular director of the SNF Agora Institute. But as you can see, university students will have an active role in our discussion. So may I also introduce April Anthony from the University of Delaware, Faith Applegate from the University of Pennsylvania, Anna Oakes from the Columbia University, and Luke McDermott from the University of Nebraska. Again, thank you all for being with us tonight and welcome. During the course of the discussion, we will present some of the findings of a national survey that was conducted by the research agency YouGov exclusively for us, for our discussion today. An exclusive survey for the SNF Dialogues Initiative with some very interesting findings. Let me remind also to all of you that, as always, we aim to include your questions, your thoughts in this live discussion. So please, as you very well know, send them to us through our app. And if you haven't downloaded so far, you can download the SNF Dialogues app by scanning the QR code you can see on the screen. So the recent protests in American universities have left us, at least, with many questions. This inspired us, I mean, the initiative of the SNF Dialogues and our team to organize today's discussion. But I would like to hear from you. What was your initial reaction? No reaction? No thought about what happened last month? I don't think so.
I'll say a word to start, if I may.
Of course.
I think we'll look back on the last academic year, 2023, 2024, as a kind of annus horribilis in higher education in America. A year in which a lot of difficult facts became more visible to the entire society. One of the main facts, maybe the most fundamental one, I think, is that a veil was drawn back on some of the confusion or perhaps even hypocrisy that has been part of the culture of some American higher education. Just two quick examples. We've seen a phenomenon of the past 30 years with university presidents in making statements on controversial political topics at an increasingly fast pace. But then, as we all saw after the initial attacks in Israel, the presidents fell silent, or they made statements and then changed them the next day. They finally found a topic in which there was no safe thing to say. And just one other example, of course, the congressional testimony of the presidents. It was a political theater in the least good sense, it seemed to me, in a whole variety of ways. But it did show something about this strange tension or even hypocrisy about the commitment to free speech on some topics, but not on other topics. And that's something that I think is difficult for us, people who love our universities, but it's also a really challenging time, a challenge we need to try to rise to meet.
I can jump in here too. I think, I agree that I think there is this moment of reckoning that has been brought to the forefront by some of the events that have been going on. One of the things that I think about a lot is, central to what it means to be part of an institution of higher education is education, and I think that some of the dilemmas that we faced in this past year around the campus protests really called into question what is the extent to which universities are fulfilling the mission that they have to provide the kind of education, not only that our students, but that our entire communities need to be able to confront and grapple with some of the toughest issues that we face in our society. And I think that part of, with every challenge, there's always an opportunity. There's a phrase sometimes that some of my friends who work in politics use where they say, never waste a good crisis, and so maybe there's an opportunity here to kind of rethink what it is that we can and should be doing to equip ourselves, all the parts of our community. And from that, I mean, our faculty, our students, our administrators, the communities that we inhabit, the geographic communities that we inhabit, to be able to handle these kinds of tensions, because being able to do so, I think, is central to the university. And and part of what we need to recover as part of our missions.
Irene?
Like to yeah, thanks.
Sorry.
I'd like to share.
You go ahead, Irene.
Thank you. I'd like to share my first two thoughts on the protest. My first thought was protests have been a part of the college experience for decades. And a lot of these schools are actually using prior protests in their recruitment materials. Come here and you can protest. So the hypocrisy was a little stunning. But my first thought was, as in the past, students today are combining their education with thinking critically about what's going on in the world. And some of our students had very strong feelings and opinions on these issues. My second thought was that our institutions need to rise to this challenge. They need to meet this challenge by helping students understand different points of view, by encouraging students to examine and challenge even the most deeply held beliefs, by providing space for open dialogue and inquiry, and they failed. Our universities failed. The administrations of our universities failed on this account. The difference between the protests I saw now, the protests against apartheid earlier, and the protests against the Vietnam War in the 1960s and 70s was, this time our administrations brought in riot police and violently arrested students. This is absolutely outrage. And so I could go on and on, but those are my first thoughts on the college protests, where students have been protesting for decades. It's part of the educational experience, and it's our job to facilitate their growth in service of learning and understanding.
I feel slightly awkward coming in as an outsider, but from an outsider's perspective, I tend to have a lot of agreement with what Irene has just said, with the additional point: from outside, the US looks like a violent society in its policing and in a lot of its activities. So violence on campus is not unusual, and police on campus is not unusual. When I was a graduate student at UCLA, police were on campus and there were serious issues around that sort. I don't think the presidents acquitted themselves at all well, but it was a curious thing from a British perspective or of a European perspective, because presidents in the US are, in a sense, a political position. So it's not, or they act as a quasi-political position within the university and how they represent it. So the strange thing for an outside view was the advocacy of free speech and at the same time being called in front of Congress, so that sort of direct political involvement in the nature of the activities on campus, partly locally through the calling on administrators to bring the police on campus, and then for presidents to account for themselves in front of a congressional committee, indicates to me that the politicization of universities, the threat to free speech, comes in part from politicians and the way in which they, in a sense, utilize disruption on campus for political ends. Not in any way defending the presidents and what they said. So, as political positions, they behaved politically ineptly. But that's a slightly different issue. And I think when we get on to the surveys, we will show we will see remarkably robust responses by students to the positive role that universities have. So I think we need to distinguish the public political discourse and the mobilization of that discourse, and perhaps especially in an election year in the US, from actually any kind of sense as a deep-seated problem within universities themselves.
Thank you very much, all of you. I would like to hear from the university students who are joining with us today, based on the experience you had And that's why I would start with you, Anna, because you're coming from Columbia University and we witnessed what happened few months ago. But I would love all of you to share with us your thoughts, either based on the experience that you had at the university you are, or in general, your point of view.
Yeah, hi, thanks for having me and all of us. It's been a very intense past year. I was on campus in the spring and covering the protests and the university response and the multiple times that they sent the police on students. I think it's hard because a university, especially for students, is a kind of transient place. So I think there's this assumption that all the students will leave or graduate or be suspended and the university can go back to normal. But this fall, at least, there's been this sense of a real disruption of the fragile trust between students and the administration. I think American universities take on this responsibility of raising the person to be a full person beyond just being a student. And I think when you have administration calling in hundreds and hundreds of police on their own students, suspending students, clearly taking the prioritizing the concerns of some students over others, not protecting students who were facing Islamophobia or chemical attacks by their classmates. I think there's a real rupture in that trust. Yeah.
Thanks. Faith, April, Luke.
Yeah, hello. I think it was a very similar situation at Penn. There was a lot of uncertainty and tension among the student body. As you know, we had protests and counter protests, and our university president left after the congressional hearing, and a lot of pressure and tension surrounding her position in the university. And yeah, I would just agree with Anna that it was just a very tense moment, and you could see that the university was failing certain students in supporting them. Students were worrying about being doxxed, worrying about backlash for expressing their viewpoints and for standing for what they believed in. And I think it was an unfortunate time to see students just feel so scared to have their voices heard, and just a lot of fear about retaliation and crackdown.
Yeah, I would say I definitely had a different perspective just because at the time I was actually studying in Bangor University in Wales in the spring when this all really started heating up. So similar to what John was talking about, I was seeing it kind of from the perspective of my classmates abroad and just kind of watching people's opinion and their ideas of the US university system dissolve in front of me, and just the reputation kind of fall apart was really interesting, and an interesting thing to kind of come to terms with myself, knowing that I was going to be walking back into that in a few months. So it was a really disheartening time, I would say, and I know a lot of people personally affected by this conflict, and it was hard knowing that they were at home struggling with so much scrutiny and potential violence.
Yeah, I apologize if my internet is a little unstable, but my perspective on it really came from some work that I was doing in student government. Students on campus were organizing protests, and our administration was trying to formulate their response to the students. And we found that one of the best approaches that we could take was a cooperative relationship between the administration and students. And I think that, so at least on my campus specifically, there ended up being cooperative relationships, and I think that the students ended up engaging civically in the ways that they wanted to. One issue that I was seeing across campuses, though, is that university leadership is really uncomfortable with the idea of disruption. I think Irene made a great point when she said that protest has really been a part of the university experience for a long time. And I think universities, especially since 90s, 2000s, 2010s, have kind of forgotten that. And universities become much more corporatized over the years, and they see disruption as an interruption of the product that students are buying instead of a supplement to the experience that they're living in. And I think that mindset shift is really accounts for a lot of what we're seeing, is that it's the idea that certain students can't have their product diminished when these protests are happening, and instead of viewing protests as natural expression that students should be allowed to engage in.
Thank you. One freedom enjoyed in US democracy is freedom of speech and expression. When it comes to supporting free expression, do you think colleges, universities in the United States should do more or less? So simple, so generic. What do you think?
I can jump in here. So
Yeah, sure.
obviously, kind of freedom, the freedom of speech and academic freedom, I think we would all agree, is foundational to universities and making universities work. I think in answering the question, I want to go back to something that John was saying, which is the idea that the politicization of campuses, I think, has made some of these questions a lot more challenging than they need to be. And so one of the things about universities is that as institutions, part of their great strength, but I think also part of the challenge that they're facing right now is their permeability, right? That universities are decentralized entities, they're very open and permeable, and that kind of openness is part of what gives them their strength, right? And allows for the kind of learning and the exchange of ideas and all the vibrancy that we want on campuses. But it also makes them subject to the kind of politicization that John was pointing to. And so I think one of the real challenges with the debates about free speech that I see in the United States is that I think a lot of universities actually are working really hard at the micro level, in the classrooms, and the interactions between faculty and students, and all these things to allow for that free and open exchange of ideas. But they can't help but be subject to the same kind of pressures that we're seeing not only on college campuses, but throughout our political system in the US. And so to me, the question about free speech really raises this question about how is it that we recover this ability throughout American society and on college campuses to rebuild institutions that are not so brittle, that are able to kind of withstand tensions and differences of opinion and debate, that we need to see not only on our college campuses, but throughout. And I think that we see that in microcultures that exist on every college campus that I have, had the privilege of experiencing. And we need to work to make those microcultures not just a experience, but like the experience, that can get communicated to what campuses are trying to do throughout the institution.
Harry, I keep what you mentioned, and we will get back to that in a bit because I want to get a bit deeper. I'm referring now to whatever we do call academic freedom and free speech, because it seems like this is a whole world there, although we use it very often and very easy, both expressions. But do you think that there were other people from the media to the state itself that mismanaged the situation, denying the protests?
You mean if we look across all the camp? I mean, absolutely. Like, were there? I mean, to me, it's like, were there questions? Were there mistakes that were made, and how campuses responded? Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think we can all sort of point to any number of stories. I think what I worry about is because the issue has become so politicized, people can pick on mistakes and then portray them as the experience, the totality of the experience across all campuses. And I think there's actually a lot more variation than sometimes it might seem. And that even within one campus, because they are so decentralized, there's a real variety of experience there. And I think the challenge that we have is to figure out how we identify the cultures of open inquiry, free expression that I think do exist in a lot of places, and then expand them so that they become more pervasive throughout the campus.
Let's see what and how actually university students replied, and this is one of the results that we will discuss tonight. I remind all of you that this is the survey that YouGov implemented exclusively for the SNF Dialogues discussion. So one freedom enjoyed in the US, as exactly as I asked you, democracy is freedom of speech and expression. When it comes to supporting free expression, do you think colleagues in universities in the US should be doing a lot more, doing somewhat more, doing somewhat less, and doing a lot less? And here we are. We will start seeing the findings. And as you can see, almost 90%, I mean the 33% and the 55% doing a lot more or doing somewhat more of the students participating into this survey said that universities should do more or somewhat more in terms of supporting free expression. What's your comment on that?
Can I make a, because we're talking in a highly politicized situation where students in a survey are responding in part to media discourse about universities, I think this sort of kind of question doesn't really get it. And usually you would ask a further question, and that was you would ask the students a question about their own university, which is what has happened in the other surveys. And then the numbers would change quite dramatically when students are asked about their own university. So that similar surveys in Britain, for example, have found that a lot of students express concern about intolerance within university. I think the figure was 49% of students said that there was increasing intolerance in universities. When asked about their university, 80% of students said there was no issue of expressing their opinions within their own university. So in that sense, they have both an immediate experience of the university in which they're in and the university in the public imagination. And I think part of the problem is how the university is being constructed in the public imagination. And that's very different from the way the university is in terms of the experience of most universities, most students across most universities. And so I would be a bit troubled that this kind of survey question reproduces the problem rather than, in a sense, tries to identify where that perception is coming from. And if it's coming from outside the university, then it's quite difficult to understand what it is that universities can do about a perception deliberately mobilized in the public for specific kinds of political purposes. I don't want to question those political purposes because obviously that's what democracy is about. And we're talking about universities and their relation to democracy. So democracy functions in a particular way through public discourse. And universities are a setting, an institutional setting within, within a democracy. And they sit at a slightly uneasy relation to it, even when they're performing their role properly. They're not necessarily.
Can I jump in
That's
on
very
this?
interesting. Just give me a second and I'll get directly to you. For the history, to this survey, actually 1,000 university students responded, and this survey was ongoing for 3 weeks across the US. And also the characteristics of the students who responded to to these questions and to the questionnaire overall, the results are representative of the student population in terms, and I'm reading exactly how we received all the methodology from the from YouGov. In terms of ethnicity, socioeconomic status, gender, political affiliation, race, educational level, region, and types of universities, public or private, and all of you will have the opportunity to have all the fundings tonight. We're gonna discuss only a few of them, but in a few days, the whole survey, all the results with an analysis on them will be uploaded and published on our website, on our platform, snfdialogues.org. So maybe there, John, all these questions that you now just mentioned and all the characteristics will be available. But what you just said, it's very important and interesting, because right after John's mention, we will see the second question and how students responded, because it's very important, the fact that they seem to be very they feel good with the role of the university with regards their university, with regards to the educational part, but with in terms with the platforms or spaces, so that they can be engaged even more, to be more exposed to whatever we do call democratic process. It seems that these are the lowest numbers are there. John, you wanted to say something.
Well, I'll say two things, I think. One is just that Heterodox Academy has for several years been running a large survey of American students. It's called the Campus Expression Survey. And a lot of our data suggests something, a different story than what you're describing, John Holmwood. And I guess I would say this. I think our data shows a strong erosion in free speech culture on US campuses, starting especially around 2015. We don't think that erosion is caused by outside forces, politicians, or the media, though clearly those forces don't help in a lot of ways. They've thrown fuel on the fire, perhaps. But I believe, from my experience as a professor, suggests strongly that a lot of these threats to free speech we see on college campuses are very much homegrown. They're grown up on the campuses themselves. It's on the campuses where we've seen a rise of shoutdowns, of deplatforming of speakers, and of other kinds of behavior that's not suggested. It's not suggestive of a community of imperfect learners brought together, convening with humility to search for truth in a complicated world where nuance is the most important value. It's rather often been a world that's been encouraged of sort of black-white thinking, of simplistic good people versus bad people, often based on identity. And that paradigm, that worldview, it's not just Marcuse, there's others too, but those are ideas that that were born on universities and have dominated university life. And I think we're seeing a reckoning of that fact of university life now being made more visible to the wider public. Clearly, politicians are making hay out of it in all kinds of inappropriate and I think unfortunate ways. But I want to really push back on the suggestion that the university's problems are not homegrown. I think they are homegrown, and perhaps the solutions can be homegrown too.
Harry, you're about to say something?
Yeah. So I think, in a lot of these kind of discussions, I often end up in a sort of both and place. And I think there's a both and situation here. Like, I think it is absolutely true that universities have a role to play in the situation that we're in. It is also true, I think, that there is this politicization that is not helpful to the kind of conversations that we're having. The Heterodox Academy surveys are obviously so important and have been terrific in, I think, agitating an important national conversation on what's going on. I can't speak to other campuses, but I can sort of speak to our campus at Hopkins. And I know that when we do surveys on campus with students here, one of the things that we find is that students don't feel like they don't report being indoctrinated by their faculty in the classrooms, right? They don't feel like they're just getting one-sided instruction or anything like that. But where they feel the most constricted in terms of their ability to kind of openly share views is through the fear of kind of peer retribution. and that to me is a sign, when we sort of will ask, like, do you feel like you might get a lesser grade because of certain views that you might have? And there is definitely, I don't mean to minimize, there's definitely a distinct, small minority of students who might have that fear, but the vast majority of students don't have that fear. But what they do worry is if they share certain views, they'll get castigated by their peers, and that to me is the kind of thing that I'm talking about, that we are a part of a broader set of trends that exist throughout society. One of the things that I like to think about a lot is we have to remember that the things that democracy asks people to do are not natural, right? Like, it's a really hard thing that we're asking people to do, to engage with people who are different from them, to debate across difference, we're not evolutionarily kind of set up to not be self-interested and not be parochial. Like, these are all really hard capacities that they have to learn. And part of what we try to think about is how often are people invited into opportunities to really engage in and learn how to contest ideas, to deliberate and engage with people who are different from them, and then to also ask this question of how do we forge a common life together with people who we don't always agree with? And that's a really hard thing that we're asking people to do. And I absolutely agree that universities have a crucial role to play in educating that. And I think that there's a way in which that has been really underemphasized in, as, the history of the institutions have evolved. But that, and so I don't want to minimize the kind of mistakes that we're playing, but I also want to sort of, emphasize that I think there is a sort of give and take that goes on between what's going on in the broader society and then what's going on in our campuses.
Getting to you, to the university students, based on your experience and based on what you witnessed the previous academic year, is there anything you feel that your university had reacted in a totally different way? For those of you, for instance, Faith and Anna and Faith, we remember how everything started. One of the universities was UPenn. And of course, we very well, unfortunately, for the very bad and wrong reasons, we remember how the academic year finished with what happened at Columbia campus. But also April, Luke, to all of you, whoever would like to share with us your thoughts based on your experience to your university?
I think coming from a public institution, I can especially speak to the politicization of our universities and discourse that happens here. It's become especially true that state actors in the state legislature has become more involved in trying to dictate what is happening on campus. And I think it's become more true that actors within the university feel more inclined to follow directives from these actors. And I think that's especially harmful to the discourse that we're having. I think we want to create a liberal environment in the sense of discussion and liberal free thought, but we can't achieve that through a liberal means. And I think a lot of the proposals that are being made in order to create a better environment for learning for students is to create politically neutral education or to censor politically just topics that are not as politically acceptable. And I think that those are not good approaches to education. I think that that is the approach that a lot of public institutions are going towards. And I think that is actually really harmful to creating a culture where people feel like they can have productive civic engagement. I do think there also is truth to the argument that students feel scared to share certain political views in the university setting. What the university can do to actually facilitate that, I'm not completely sure, but I don't think politically neutral or politically censored education is the route towards that.
I think Luke makes an excellent point, and I want to hear from more of the students, but before, and that's what I just want to wonder if the students could also incorporate in their responses to this excellent question, the role of their faculty and what they're seeing from their faculty. We heard how you felt about the administration response. I hear what Luke is saying. It's an excellent point about the state actors, but I wonder how the students are viewing the faculty's response to what happened last spring and what's ongoing. And I didn't mean to jump in, to interrupt the students, but only to ask if they could maybe expand.
Of course, and by the way, that's the spirit, and this is what we've been trying to do, promoting a real dialogue. So yeah. Who would like to take the floor?
I'm thinking through my answer. I totally agree with Luke that often the sort of solution that's settled on is like neutrality. I don't know if you're kind of saying this, Luke, but where instead of like actually engaging with difficult, sometimes contradicting opinions, you kind of don't engage with any of them. So I'm at the journalism school where we've really not had many, we haven't had any like school-wide discussions of how to actually cover these events, or at least we didn't last year. And so it led to these like individual professors sometimes leading workshops with a few of their students, but by not taking on the responsibility of actually addressing these questions, you just are left with no space to talk about them except for in like private student groups. I would say also a big part of democracy and engaging with the public is an open university and an open campus. And this fall, especially, we've had this closure of Columbia's campus, where we already had a very contentious relationship with the neighborhood, which is largely Black and working class. I know Hopkins is similar in that respect. But when you have this like enclosed bubble of a university where speakers who want to enter the campus can't come on, and like just the public can't enter into the space that is very much a part of the city, it leads to these like bubbles of like sort of isolated discussion that aren't actually engaging with the actual world in any meaningful sense.
Good.
There is an interesting.
I'm sorry, can I just briefly add directly onto that point? I just want to sharpen the question a little bit for the students, if I may. I think it's a great point that scholarship is not a natural practice to humans. We are tribal in all kinds of ways. And it's easy to say, I want to be open-minded. I want to think about things from many perspectives and think for myself. And we're capable of that, I'm sure. But it's really interesting to note just how unnatural it is for us to do that and how hard it is. And what I wanted to do to sharpen the question a little bit for the students, though for all of us, is another trend that's been happening is that universities are going through this process of seeking to be inclusive in ways that have never been attempted by universities before. And it's a very recent phenomenon that universities have attempted to have women being welcomed in campuses in large numbers. Some of you probably know there's a Columbia student here, probably knows that Columbia is the last Ivy League school to start admitting women. Then it started graduating women in 1987. That's the last Ivy League school to do so. So it's been an incredible move towards inclusion. But there's also been a trend that the students might not be aware of that I'd be curious to hear what they think about from their experience. In 1960, the ratio of Democrats to Republicans on college faculties was about 2-to-1. Currently, and steadily over the past 50 years, that ratio has been just widening dramatically, in part because professors we hire ourselves, there's complicated reasons why the professoriate leans left. But now the ratio is something like 12-to-1. And in some disciplines, it's effectively, the Republican views are sort of become extinct. So how do we have open conversations? How does the faculty perform its function if we're, as a group, less ideologically diverse? How do we prevent bubbles from forming where universities don't see important events coming, like the election of Donald Trump? As a political scientist, I was in a department meeting, where my colleagues talked about the election predictions, and no one saw it coming. These are very sophisticated people who work on these things carefully, but they were working within a kind of a bubble. So I wonder if the students are aware of that when they think about the faculty. Do they know that the faculty tends to be more homogeneous in most universities than they used to be? Does that matter? Maybe it's not important. Maybe if we teach the
I want
right
to push
way,
back on that,
it
John.
shouldn't matter.
I want to push back on that, John. I mean, I don't doubt your statistics, but I don't think this is reflected in the classroom. So I find it a little disingenuous, and the fact that, you know, perhaps some people, I agree that people didn't see the election of Trump coming in maybe in 2016, but I don't think that's the case for last week at all. Maybe, you know, the small group you talked to, but I like I said, I don't doubt your statistics, but I think to conflate that with that kind of ideological bent being forced onto students in the classroom, I don't think that's accurate. I don't think that's true. I don't think that's right or fair.
But think about the exclusion of other voices. Think about the exclusion of Black voices, for example, in American history. In American history, up to the 1970s, it was told basically as a story about white men getting together to do the principles of the American founding.
John and Lucas,
look,
excuse me, I'm getting to you, but what you say to us is that it's all about the inclusivity, and that's all. I mean, that's the equality. What about equity?
Inclusion is a really important value, some point I want to make.
And after that, what? After the numbers, what?
So I think inclusion is an extremely important value. And then we think, how do we create an environment, a culture, where people can use that inclusivity? The big irony is that as we're becoming more inclusive at universities, people are less likely to speak to one another on campuses. The data is robust about that.
Don't you, I don't want to monopolize, and I'm getting to you, John, but before to look, but do you think that universities, colleges, education overall is not responsible somehow to educate also how to behave as citizen, how to become a citizen? It's only to check the box with regards to you know, how we have achieved all the percentage with regards to people they will get into the university. Is that enough? This is my question. Is that enough?
I would say inclusion is extremely important on many dimensions.
But
I agree.
But without activating all these people, how is it important? It is important.
And how are we going to achieve when the Supreme Court has denied affirmative action in admissions now? I mean, it's a lovely goal, but there's reality on the ground that we're no longer allowed to take race into account, you know, in admissions. So yeah, I'm all for inclusivity, but how do we achieve it in a genuine way?
I would like to, because inclusion has to have a transformative consequence. So those who were previously excluded, the nature of the academy, the nature of the positions it came up with, its epistemological self-understandings and so on, are changed by new participants within the university. You've already made a mention, John, of Marcuse, indicated that's when the rot started in, but Marcuse is the moment of the entry of different groups into the university. So one can say that what the entry of women into the academy did was transform understandings of the academy and knowledge production through gender and so on. And I would also raise the issue of the 12-to-1, you know, the shifting ratio between Republicans and Democrats. Republicans and Democrats are not the same thing now that they were then. So it would amuse me to somebody say, can you believe that there's actually American blacks voting for the Republicans? I said, yeah, didn't you realize the Republican Party was the party that American blacks identified with precisely because of its historical role? So we've been arguing about how universities function in relation to democracy, and I presume we have an understanding of liberal democracy. So if universities and professors within universities understand themselves as partly in an institution which depends upon democracy and functions for liberal democracy, if a political party gives up liberal democratic values, it's likely to have a reduced commitment from professors. So the question I'd put to you would be that these statements about liberal democracy that have been made within the Republican Party wouldn't warrant a professorial commitment if that professorial commitment was associated with the necessary values of a university. So I find the 12-to-1 shift partly a consequence of the shift of the Republican Party, not a shift in the professoriate away from liberal democratic values. So liberal democratic values used to be able to tolerate Republican and democratic support within the academy. But if one of the parties gives up those values, then there are, I think, serious consequences of how we must then understand the politicization of the academy. And so I think you're kind of neglecting the change in the meaning of being Republican.
I think we're agreeing that a
So,
wider range of
sorry,
voices
sorry,
on
John.
campus
Luke
is
is waiting so long. So Luke, and then of course.
Sorry, Luke.
All good. Yeah, I think just to respond to you, students are aware that there is a democratic lean to a lot of our faculty members, but I don't think it's the case at all that there's not a diversity in ideology or diversity in thought between those professors. There certainly are conservative professors who are registered as Democrats. There are professors who espouse untraditional academic views who are registered as Democrats. But I think John makes a really good point when he says that one party puts a premium on the truth more than the other. And I think the enterprise of being an academic means that you value truth and you value the pursuit of truth. And I think in the past 10 years or so, one party has abandoned that mission, and one, obviously there's a problem with that in politics in general, but I think there's a stark difference in the pursuit of truth between one party or the other. I think really it's a self-selection game, and that students recognize that. And we're still willing to engage with conservative viewpoints which exist on our campus, but when those viewpoints are based off of misinformation or a gross misrepresentation of reality, then it's not worthy to engage with in many cases.
Meanwhile, I'm checking our app, and there is a message that we received. I appreciate the comments about the failure of administrations, but what about some solutions? First of all, we're not here with all the solutions. If we were able to have all the solutions, we might be somewhere else. We are here to raise questions and, to promote this process, the process of the dialogue, and to remind ourselves how it is to disagree, first of all. But the comment we've received, and the user who sent that to us says something very interesting, and I would like to ask you about it, your opinion, because they say that why not a student assembly to help reform university policy? A random selection of students are given a seat, help the administration think through reform.
Nice.
John, I would like to, okay, you said nice.
I love the idea. And I just want to emphasize, and I think more voices speaking, more voices being present is really a healthy thing. It's not an easy thing, as we were saying a moment ago. It's not natural. It's easy to go for our teams and think that our team has the truth and their team doesn't. But I think it's the more views we have that are respectively engaged in conversation, that believe that there's a reality that's worth knowing and that discussion is the way to get there. That's the strength of universities. That's the deep-rooted strength that we have at these institutions. So I think we're agreeing on that main point, and I hope you would agree with me that a wider range of political viewpoints expressed on campus, intelligently expressed, aiming for truth, not just spouting off comments, actually aiming for truth in a sincere way, that would be a better situation than a situation where there's less viewpoint diversity.
Well, I can respond to the comment that Columbia has a faculty like advising sort of Senate type group, and I think there are student representatives too. But when the protests happened, the not to go back to the administration, but they kind of stormed over those groups. And so a lot of the faculty were very upset that the procedures were just blown over, most likely because of pressure from the board of Columbia. So I think it's hard because I agree that students should be part of the functioning of the university, but if you don't give people real power or take them seriously and as soon as the board disagrees with something, blow over people's suggestions and concerns, I think it feels disingenuous.
Those are
just to
violations
add
of
to-
shared governance. Those are egregious violations of shared governance, and those faculty senate bodies exist. They have power, they have authority, but if the administration runs roughshod over them, then it's important that our institutions strengthen and genuine shared governance, because real shared governance can deal with any of these problems that come up. One solution, I know the questioner asked for solutions, we don't want to give solutions. One solution is for our administrators to be chosen via robust shared governance processes where the faculty get to weigh in and assess who's going to be the chief academic officer of the institution, so that the person in charge, the president, is not a political appointee necessarily, but somebody who believes in academic freedom and free speech and shared governance, robust shared governance. These administrators are supposed to be the firewall between academic freedom on campus for students and faculty and political interference. They're supposed to be the firewall protecting academic freedom. And oftentimes we have administrators that are just lighting the match as opposed to being the firewall. But I think the student from Penn made an excellent point. And I think your AAUP, the chapter of the American Association of University chapter, the AAUP chapter on campus was all over the protests with statements. And I don't know if the students knew that or appreciated it, but faculty were working really hard when the governance bodies were inappropriately sidelined. The chapter of the AAUP chapter was standing up for the free speech rights of the students and the rights for peaceful protest.
I mean, the other solution that we haven't talked about that to me seems really clear too is also the responsibility that higher education has around civic education. And obviously, ideally, we want our students to come in having had some of that in their K-12 education. But even so, I think we still would want campuses to be sites through which students practice and rehearse and learn the capabilities, not just it's certainly the knowledge, right? But then also the kind of basic skills of doing and engaging in these kind of dialogues. And I think, that's where universities really need to move is thinking about what some of those investments are. And that requires a lot of restructuring because, there isn't a lot of incentive right now for faculty to teach those kind of courses or to invest in that as part of their own career paths and so on. And so I think there's a lot of ways in which we can rethink the structure of our institutions to promote the values that we really want to stand for.
One more question on our app. Yes, John, and you can take the floor. Can we realign this conversation to focus on the majority of college students, community? What would the panel say to the assertion that citizenship and free speech are luxuries largely reserved for full-time students?
Well, I think it's difficult to conceptualize free speech as a luxury. So that as soon as one thinks in those terms, one has almost lost the commitment to free speech. I mean, I think within European universities, there's a slightly different approach to things. So I
that
think,
would be my next question, because I would like you, John, to give a sense to all of us and to anyone who is watching us now online, to have also a sense of what happens in Europe, because European model and American model might have many differences, but they have many similarities very often with regards to the challenges they have to face, although we are talking about completely different models.
Well, I think that we would make a distinction between academic freedom and free speech. So academic freedom is about the roles of academics as teachers and as researchers. And academic freedom has particular kinds of restrictions on it. So the norms that are associated with publication, peer review, evaluation of research, meeting standards in research, and then also in teaching, conducting teaching from the perspective of developing the student's understanding. So I wouldn't regard academic freedom justified didactic teaching, for example. So those, I think, would be, there would be academic academic freedom would be surrounded by a series of norms which would be associated with a kind of professional identity, if you like. Free speech is somewhat different. And what we appreciate is that students coming on campus are not simply the students within a particular subject. They're also joining societies, engaging with different kinds of projects within communities and so on. So there we would expect them to have free speech. And in that free speech, just as politicians are in favor of free speech and robust disagreement with each other, including being rude to each other, we shouldn't think that students are not going to do that within the kinds of societies and engagements that we have. We would hope that they would learn by doing, and that the diversity on campus actually shaves off some of the rough edges within that process. But that's how most European universities would see it. Strong norms of academic freedom, different from free expression. But we have much less free expression than in the United States. So I would say academic freedom is probably more robust because it's not mixed together with free expression. But we have less free expression. We have laws against hate speech and so on, which are not, which are not the same in the US. There are things that would that are routinely published online in the US, which, if they're found in possession of a British student, would lead them charged with terrorist offences. And we also have restrictions on lawful speech. So the area, and now confess, the area of my activism, which is in relation to counter-extremism policies and directed against Muslim populations, we do have processes where universities are encouraged to deny a platform to extreme speakers. What the government has wished to do is not have right-wing speakers deemed to be extreme, but have speakers who represent Islamic normative views described as extreme, and they can be banned from campus. And if you work together with those organizations, you can also be banned from speaking on campus. So all British universities have to vet external speakers, whether they have extremist views, and read that as views sympathetic to Muslim concerns. So I am a dangerous radical in those terms and subject to restriction on campus in relation to that kind of speech. And yet my sociological position is quite conservative. I must be the only Durkheimian excluded from speech on the grounds of extreme radicalism. So it's in the free speech area that the US has much greater, what I would call informal political and muscular political engagement. But in Europe, I think there's a sinister restriction within actual political legislation. And to be quite honest, John's heterodox colleagues in Britain have not defended a single Muslim speaker excluded from campus.
Irene,
That would be unfortunate. That's not the
Irene?
HXA way.
Yes.
Would you like to make any comment on what we've heard from the whole analysis that John just shared with us?
Oh, I thought it was excellent. I agree
With regard,
completely.
I mean, there's a lot of discussion. There's a lot of public discussion. A lot of us, even if we are not academics or not anymore university students, we make statements and we have a specific position about what do we call academic freedom or free speech. So there is a need for clarifying anyway, but where do you stand? What's your opinion?
I would agree with John that the distinction between England and in the US is great, that in America, free speech is much more robust and barely limited at all. And that what free speech means is that—
Apologies, by the way, for this noise. There is a check alarm on the building that my office is.
You can't be punished by the government for your speech. You can say the president's an idiot. You can say, you know, government policy is wrong, and you can't be punished by the government for your speech. That's what free speech means for every person in the US, not just citizens. Every person in the US has robust free speech. It doesn't protect— you can be stupid, you can be wrong, and your speech is protected. Academic freedom, I would add to what John said, that in the US, academic freedom, we include academic freedom in teaching, you know, faculty broadly defined to include graduate students, any kind of academic professional, that we have academic freedom in teaching and how we teach our subject, academic freedom in research. The academic freedom is for the work. The work is allowed to go wherever it goes. It would be a violation of academic freedom for the trustees to say, I don't like your research on climate science because I've made my fortune in fossil fuels. So get rid of that climate scientist. But so you have academic freedom in research it's not for the individual, it's for the work. The work is allowed to go wherever it is. And in addition, in the US, academic freedom includes intramural speech, which is you can criticize the policies of the university, and you should not be subject to discipline by the university. And it also includes extramural speech, that your extramural speech you cannot be punished by the university for your extramural speech. So we'd have 4 aspects of academic freedom in the US for faculty: teaching, research, intramural speech, and extramural speech. And I agree that our free speech here is, you know, fundamental, and the limitations are almost non-existent, not non-existent, but free speech academic freedom in the US is broader than free speech in one aspect and narrower in another aspect. It's narrower in that academic freedom, you can't be wrong, and you know, it doesn't protect you if you're wrong or stupid. It's regulated by the scholars in the field using the norms and standards of the discipline, and regulated by robust peer review. It's broader than free speech in that free speech doesn't really apply on a private university campus. It's really only protecting you from the government, but we insist that academic freedom be more broader than just public universities. There's so much to unpack here, but I think but I think the universities are really a crucial space for the robust free expression that we expect in the United States. And it's all well and good until somebody says something you don't like, then you don't like their speech. That's not how it works. I mean,
that's why democracy is not easy, but we have to move forward. Because it's also very sensitive.
I hope that clarified free speech and academic freedom in the US.
Sure. And before moving forward, because I am also taking the time, and I would love to see one more card from the survey. But before that, since we are discussing about the the autonomy and academic freedom of universities, there is one question that I had here for you, but somebody from the audience also sent us on the app, which says that worth asking the panelists the question: when we speak about the role of the universities, how do we define the universe itself? Is it the admin part? Is it the boards? Is it the faculty? Something else? Is it a combo of all? What is it's one's responsibility? And here it's a very big discussion, I think, where any who stops where and from where the rest begins. Who is managing the universities?
And I say that's such a great question. And it raises issues about the center of the protests was questions about university investments and how they invest their endowments. So are the investments part of the university? Is it a separate thing? How do you manage that? And we're seeing now increasingly in the US in the past year in accelerating ways, the government get involved in claiming that they have an interest in university affairs. We may see more of that. The big act that the Republicans pushed through the House of Representatives a year ago, the End Woke Higher Education Act, the unfortunately named End Woke Higher Education Act, will probably be revived. And so that question about where the university begins and where it ends, what our obligations are as university people who love universities to make them better. There's a famous document, of course, from the AAUP in the 1915 statement talking about academic self-governance is the best protector of academic freedom. But they said back then that if we didn't take care of universities ourselves, we who work within universities, outsiders will come in and do the job for us. That's why I think it's so important that we be honest and open about some of our failings at universities on a variety of dimensions of diversity and try to do a better job ourselves so we don't have other people coming in to do it for us, because they'll do it in ham-handed ways that none of us want to see, I think. But I love that question. It's fabulous.
Yeah, I think I should say I totally agree with that point, that I think, I mean, so at least in the United States, like so many universities have traditions of shared governance. We talked a little bit before about the role of students, and certainly we could sort of think about ways in which we want to have shared governance across lots of the different bodies and constituencies of the university. But I think John's point is exactly right, that, in this moment of contention, we need people who are going to stand up and vigorously defend what a university stands for, what it's, why it is permeable and decentralized, and what the logic behind it is, why we have things like academic freedom, all of these different really complex pieces of the institution, and defend the values that it stands for, so that, we can then retain that tradition of self-governance. And I think that having an honest reckoning with what our strengths and weaknesses have been as an institution actually, absolutely is a part of that ability to retain that independence. And so I think that's, certainly, we're talking about solutions before, that's certainly got to be a part of the pathway forward, in addition to some of these other things that we've been talking about as well.
I mean, I think Clark Kerr suggested that we stopped using the term university and referred to multiversity to indicate the multiple functions of the university. And perhaps we should stop in thinking as well of a multiversity rather than a university. We think of the university's communities, it's a community of communities. Or because the problem is we tend to think in the language of a singular collectivity. And I know one of the things that we were wanting to discuss was pluralism. And I would say that pluralism should be represented in how we describe the university as a multiple entity. Multiversity perhaps doesn't run off the tongue, but it made the point pretty well, that there are different interests, different modes of governance appropriate to those different roles within the university and different communities that the university served and different communities within the university. And that's what we manage. In that sense, it's not how do we manage the university for democracy, but perhaps thinking of the democracy of the university as the very exemplar of what a modern democracy is, multiple different communities, plural.
That would be the best. Yes, Irene.
I think John's last sentence was just what I wanted to say. I think we in the higher ed community have not done a good job in explaining the value of the university and the importance of the university. And it's not just, good to have in a democracy. It's a pillar. Higher education is a pillar of democracy. And when you undermine higher education, as it is being undermined these days, you're threatening democracy. I mean, we're a pillar of democracy because higher ed is a pillar of democracy because we have experts on everything. We have experts on public health. We have experts on climate science. We have experts on economics, all these experts to help draft public policy. We train the next generation of doctors, lawyers, historians, musicians, engineers. We train the next generation of professionals. And we have experts available who can call out corruption in business and in government. It's a crucial check and balance for democracy to have this autonomous institutions of higher ed that are able to be a check and balance. And so, as I said, when you're undermining higher ed the way it's being undermined these days, it's really a threat to democracy. And democracy is messy, it's hard work, but we need to be doing a better job of explaining to our communities the importance and the value of the institution, the importance and value of academic freedom, and the importance and value of free speech, student protest, peaceful protest, and messy speech, especially when the issues are so polarizing.
There's an ancient Greek expression, physician, heal thyself. And in this case, I hope universities can heal ourselves. Part of the healing yourself is diagnosing the problem and taking responsibility for ways in which we can do better ourselves as university people, to be honest about dimensions of diversity that we take seriously, dimensions that we don't take seriously, trying to make truly open places for conversations that we don't agree with. But I think we agree on that general point, that healing ourselves is better than having others coming in to heal us.
Getting back to the
Sorry.
survey, go ahead, Anna, because I would like also to see what the rest of the students answered, but yes, go ahead.
Okay. Oh, well, just quickly, I as important as the university is, I think they also are like inherently exclusionary spaces, and like it's hard to talk about universities as part of democracy when they're so expensive, and you like elevate people who've got the knowledge of people who've gone through a university setting and kind of elevate that above the experiences of people who can't enter a university. So I think it's also about a spreading of.
I agree completely with you. I mean, there's been higher education, especially at the state level, the disinvestment has been going on for decades. And it used to be when I went to college, you could go through college and, working a part-time job and you come out with no debt. And you simply can't do that anymore. And it's grossly unfair to today's students. And I feel like that, higher education should be free to anyone, should be accessible to anyone willing to do the work. It's supposed to be an engine of social mobility. It's supposed to be a ladder into the middle class. But the decades of disinvestment, which we have been pushing back against for 40 years, has resulted in this student debt crisis, which is unacceptable, and the crisis of contingency, where about 3/4 of the faculty now are not on the tenure track and are at-will employees who have no academic freedom and could be fired because a trustee doesn't like, a tweet they put out. So I couldn't agree more with you that the exclusionary nature of the institutions is something we must deal with.
Let's move forward with. I think that we all. I feel that somehow we recognize the same need and the same importance. And it's very interesting listening different point of views or different approaches, but we agree, and Irene, you described it perfectly, that higher education is a pillar of democracy. It's not only about the knowledge, it's about the education. That's why we have two different words. Because yes, of course, it's about the studies, it's about the very specific curriculum, but at the same time, it's it's about the society and it's about the democracy and all the tools and processes that, as Hari has mentioned in the past, is how we experience, how we do democracy instead of just having democracy. How do we do democracy?
Nice.
Getting
Nice.
directly to getting back directly to the survey, we asked students how satisfied they are with various aspects of university. Let's see what they had to say, because here we can see that there are a lot of categories, and they had to respond with regards to adapt to the needs of the modern world. Prepare students to participate in democracy, prepare students to enter the modern workforce, encourages diversity in the student body, provides mental health support for students, integrates the latest technology into the learning process, provides instructions to students. And here we can say that from their answers, university adapts to the needs of the modern world. 73% said it has a very or mostly positive impact, while 9%, for instance, said it has a very or mostly negative impact. And it prepares students to participate in democracy. 61% says that it has a very or mostly positive impact, while 11% says that it has a very or mostly negative impact. And moving forward to the next slide, please. What do we see? What do we see here? The question is, thinking now about the university you're currently attending, what impact, if any, does your university have on the following: the local economy of the city or town where it is located, the future career prospects of students, preparing students to participate in democracy, advancing scientific knowledge, standing up for important issues facing the world, preparing students to be leaders, and giving students space to develop and express diverse ideas. And here we can see that according to the students we asked, most of them still believe in the role and the impact of universities and the specific university, their university, to the scientific knowledge and their own professional future. However, we can see that the impact the university has on preparing them for democracy and civic engagement, as well as to be leaders, is the lowest in comparison with the others. So that somebody easily could say, and it's obvious, that university students in the US are more than happy with their universities. And we very well know that many students from abroad would love joining an American college or an American university. But the main question here, which is exactly the same in Europe, although we have, for instance, in Greece, we have public education system, and we have to face another kind of challenges. So the question is there, and the question is the same in Europe and in the US, despite the completely different model universities and colleges have. It's about the role, and it's about the 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 encouraging of students to be even more exposed on how to react and interact with other citizens, with other students, with somebody they disagree. And having said all of the above with regards to the model, with regards to the expectations, with regards to the different point of views, with regards to the role, with regards to the limits based on the academic freedom, and with regards to what do we do individually, as individuals, I mean, you already mentioned what happened a week ago here in the US with the presidential elections. So before we move on for the final part of our very interesting, I have to admit, discussion, and thank all of you for joining into this alive dialogue and discussion. We're 1 week right after the US presidential election. So what do you expect from the Trump administration on higher education? I mean, what brings, what comes the next day?
I'll say what I fear. I fear that, I fear that what we've seen in some of the red states, most notably in Florida with the Stop Woke Act, where there's an attempt to actively censor ideas on the curriculum and on the campus. I fear that, that's my fear, that we'll see more of that. I have some reason for hope on that. The draft of the Republican Party platform that went through Congress this last year that gained some Democratic support did not have any censorship elements within that act. If that act maintains that characteristic, then I'm guardedly optimistic. But I'm concerned that there are people that are so unhappy with universities. They feel that we're still, and many of us, in a state of denial about the homogeneity and the groupthink that happens at universities. And I feel that opens us up to media portrayals that are exacerbating these problems. Unless we solve it ourselves and are honest about it together, we may find, again, solutions put down upon us that none of us might want.
I mean, I would say I have the same fears, but what I find paradoxical about it, and it's the point that I made before, if you ask students only have experience of their own university. So when you ask them a question about their own university, what you see is an overwhelmingly positive response. So on the basis of those responses, there is no problem within universities. If you ask students about universities in general, they reflect what is in the media describing other universities than their own. So one of the things is that it's difficult to say that what you need is universities to sort themselves out, because in a way it's not in the interests of some politicians for the idea that university can be sorted out, because it's precisely the mobilization of hostility to universities that is evident within the election result. The so-called, what is presented, at least within British newspapers, of the different voting patterns of college-educated versus non-college educated voters. So if you're generating a resentment of college education because that's your base, there's nothing a university can do to self-sort itself out. So I think the self-sorting dialogue argument is one that feeds into the authoritarian mood against universities. It has been in Britain, but our Conservative Party lost the election, so it's rolled back somewhat. But I would say the real worry is that the US now has a government that is not committed to liberal democracy, and in that sense is not going to be committed to universities in principle, not because the universities have something wrong with them. What's wrong with them is their liberalism. And that's ineradicable without getting rid of universities.
Yeah.
I want to go back to just a point that we made before, which I think is worth reiterating in the context of this conversation, which is that universities not only have to teach democracy, but we have to be exemplars of it, and so that means contending with, these debates and disagreements that we're having on this panel, this question of like, what is really, how do we understand the problem? Even, these are things that we are equipped to be able to have honest conversations about, and that's exactly what we should be doing. And I think that, being able to both model and vigorously defend the value of that kind of work is what we need to be doing, in order to, I think, mount the kind of, strongest defense is a strong offense, right? And so we have to be able to articulate the value of what we stand for and why we stand for it, and then bring truth to the way in which that's being handled. And so, I know we touched on that point before, but I think certainly as we think about the coming years and the changing politics in the United States, it's going to become ever more important for universities to contend with those questions.
And I would just add to that, I agree completely. I would just add that it's the university, it's the institutions themselves that are going to have to do the work to save themselves. That's no one, that's the faculty, it's the enlightened administrators, it's
Right.
that are going to have to push back against the damage that we are likely to see from the new administration. I really think it's everybody's going to need to be engaged in this fight to save what the institutions should be.
Before finishing our today's discussion, you will have the time, April, Faith, Anna, Luke, to ask the speakers if you want to ask anything. And of course, you, John, Irene, John, and Harry, if you want to ask the students, it can go only both ways, the dialogue. But I have to admit that we have received many questions about the funding, because this is the funding of universities and colleges. This is a very sensitive part, because based on the process that funding follows, or the path that money follows, affects directly to the whole management of the university or the college. That's why I asked earlier who manages in the end of the day universities. So I will choose one from the many, because there are really many. How can we ensure that private / profit interests of universities don't get in the way of their institutional integrity?
I think moments like we've been passing through in this past year, give opportunities for presidents to stand forth and remind people publicly of what universities are about. And I do, again, I'm going to say, does thinking about some of the ways we're imperfect and need to be better. And just to remember that we are in a democracy, part of the wider ecosystem, the wider political ecosystem. We should be modeling behavior better. We should be more charitable to views that we might not like ourselves, to try to understand where those people are coming from. These are things we could do a better job at universities than we've done. Fighting for justice and searching for the truth are sometimes in tension with each other. There's different norms and different ideas that can be associated with that. The drive for nuance, for humility, the acceptance of our own fallibility, those are things that are very epistemic norms. Politics is a different set of values often. Solidarity is an important norm there. So finding our way through that tension, being exemplars of navigating it, having spokespersons stand forward to talk what universities are truly for and why they're important, why they deserve to have this incredible independence that they have. That's an important opportunity in this moment that I hope will continue to rise toward.
Yeah, just to build on that, Yuval Levin is a scholar who sort of says that, the great challenge of democracy is to create mechanisms through which people can act together without thinking alike. And I think that when we think about the role of funders, of private interests, or any one constituency of the university, the challenge is that universities work best when they really are governed by, some small d democratic system through which lots of different kinds of voices can have say, which is exactly what democracy is. And so I think universities face that same challenge of how is it that we can bring all these competing interests together and have people learn how to work together without necessarily thinking alike. And so in the same way that we have these challenges in our country, we have these challenges at a small scale in our universities.
That's so well said.
I think we need to recognize that, I agree, very well said. I think we need to recognize that the underfunding of universities in the US over the last 40, going on 50 years has had a devastating effect on our system of education. Now you either have to be wealthy enough to afford a college education or willing to take on a lifetime of crushing debt. And because the state funding has been pulled, this leads administrators to look for money elsewhere, and wealthy donors are more than happy to step in with their money. And this money often comes with strings, and those strings were liable to violate academic freedom. Those strings are liable to violate shared governance. So I think this is really, it's important to understand the underfunding here is a huge problem, and I don't see it getting fixed in the new administration.
Can I follow up on that and specifically around the funding? Because I think, Irene, you mentioned when saying underfunded, you're comparing to a period when they were properly funded, and that meant students didn't enter into debt and so on. So I think one of the changes in the university in relation to its environment, let's call it now the economic environment, is we no longer have inclusive economic growth. Because we don't have inclusive economic growth, the contribution of universities to the economy is not a contribution that is shared across all citizens, including those who don't go to university. So it's not a surprise to me that there is a division opening up between those with a college education and those without, because those with a college education have that education on the basis of an investment in their private human capital. That's the logic at the moment. And that investment in their private human capital constructs an interest, their economic interest against that of other citizens without college degrees. So I think a particular solidarity between college and non-college citizens has been broken by the funding model that has been introduced. And I think it will be difficult to bridge across that divide without, in a sense, recognizing that inequality, broader inequality, is part of the problem, and that broader inequality creates resentment of the college educated, and that's partly what is playing out, I think, in the US at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. In fact, the institutions should be a solution to fixing that broader inequality.
Yeah, indeed.
That's very good. Very good point. Any question? Anyone who would like to raise a question to any of you? Any comment, any thoughts before we wrap up?
Thank you for convening us.
Oh, yeah. My question was just about the finances, so it already got asked.
Believe me, John, although we've started this initiative back in 2017, but also as journalist speaking, I do really like and enjoy discussions like that, exactly because we're missing discussions like that from people, experts who have the expertise, but they're here also to join this public kind of discussion around issues that concern us all, or at least should concern us all as citizens, because we are, all of us, citizens. So I would like to thank you for this discussion today. I would like to thank all of you for all the last I mean, the previous months we are together, and you are together with the Dialogues team and the team who is working on the content. It's a difficult theme, and we had to raise this discussion, hold this discussion, raising all these questions since just 1.5 hours. But thank you very much, because you were very willing since the beginning to work with us, and not because of us, but because you, first of all, including academics, including university students, exactly because you probably believe to the importance of the issue and the thematic. So we would like, on behalf of the SNF Dialogues Initiative, to thank you for joining us. Thank you for being dialoguers, because this is what we need. We need dialoguers instead of experts and individuals who are exposed only to monologues. I would also like to thank Stephen Ruckman, Managing Director of the Stavros Niarchos Foundation Agora Institute at the Johns Hopkins University. As we said since the beginning, we're supposed to be there, all of us, but we finally made it virtually. But Stephen was also with a team of dialogues all this period, and Jennifer Domagal Goldman, Executive Director at the All In Campus Democracy Challenge of Civic Nation, for their contributions throughout the preparation of this discussion and the coordination with universities. And I remind to all of you that a full analysis of our survey will be published soon on our platform, snfdialogues.org. Thank you once more, and I do really mean it. Hope to see you, all of you, again at some point, discussing about issues that we do really care and matter for all of us. And have a good night. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.